What happens when a decade of devotion is repaid with the ultimate betrayal? On the night of her 10th wedding anniversary, surrounded by friends and family, Catherine Davenport was publicly humiliated. Her husband's pregnant mistress didn't just crash the party, she slapped Catherine across the face, a stinging declaration of war. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot about her sons. Not just any sons, but three of the most powerful CEOs in the country. They watched their mother's heart break, and in that moment, they swore a silent, unbreakable vow. This isn't a story of heartbreak. It's a story of methodical, devastating revenge. Stay tuned to find out how three sons brought a titan of industry and his conniving mistress to their knees, begging for a mercy they would never receive. The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom at the Sterling Hotel dripped light like frozen diamonds, casting a soft, forgiving glow upon the 200 guests. From the polished marble floors to the soaring, frescoed ceiling, everything screamed wealth, power, and permanence. It was a monument to a decade of marriage between Catherine and Richard Davenport, a night meant to solidify their status as one of New York's premier power couples. Catherine stood near the cascading fountain of champagne, a vision in a sapphire gown that matched the cool, collected look in her eyes. The smile on her face was a masterpiece of social engineering, practiced over years of corporate dinners and charity galas. It was bright, it was warm, and it didn't quite reach the depths of her soul, where a quiet, gnawing unease had taken root. Richard, her husband, was across the room holding court. He wasn't a man who mingled, he was a planet, and people were simply drawn into his orbit. At 52, he was still strikingly handsome, his dark hair now distinguished by streaks of silver at the temples. He laughed, a booming sound that commanded attention, and clapped a city councilman on the back. He was the founder and CEO of Davenport Industries, a construction and real estate behemoth that had reshaped the city's skyline. He was brilliant, ruthless, and lately a stranger to her. Their life was a carefully curated exhibition of success. A sprawling mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, summers in the Hamptons, winters in Aspen. They had everything, or so the society pages claimed. But Catherine knew the truth. The mansion was cavernous and silent. The penthouse was a place Richard used for late meetings. The vacations had become solo trips for her, filled with polite excuses from a husband too busy conquering the world to share it with her. The foundation of their marriage had developed hairline fractures years ago, and now a chasm was forming between them, one she pretended not to see for the sake of peace, for the sake of the life she had so painstakingly helped build. She had met Richard when he was nothing more than a man with a blueprint and a dream, operating out of a cramped office that always smelled of stale coffee. She had been his first employee, his bookkeeper, his confidant. She had believed in him when no one else did, working tirelessly by his side, sacrificing her own aspirations to fuel his. And when success finally came, she had gracefully stepped into the background, raising their three boys while he built his empire. Those boys were her everything. They were here tonight, a testament to her true life's work. Alexander, the eldest at 30, stood by the bar, exuding an aura of quiet intensity. He was the CEO of Aura, a revolutionary tech firm that had made him a billionaire before his 28th birthday. His gaze was sharp, analytical, missing nothing. He rarely smiled, but when he looked at his mother, his expression softened with a fierce, protective love. Benjamin, the middle son at 28, was a stark contrast. He was the charismatic CEO of Apex Media Group, a global news and entertainment conglomerate. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, his smile disarming, his words charming. He could shape public opinion with a single memo, a skill he wielded with surgical precision. He caught Catherine's eye and gave her a subtle wink, a silent message of support that warmed her more than the champagne ever could. And then there was Samuel, the youngest. At 25, he was the CEO of Argus Global, a titan in logistics and private security. He was built like the professional rugby player he'd almost become, with a watchful, steady presence. He didn't say much, but he saw everything. His company's network spanned the globe, an intricate web of information and influence. He stood near the entrance, his shoulders back, a silent sentinel guarding his mother's world. Her sons, her beautiful, powerful sons. They were the one part of her life that felt unequivocally real, the one success that couldn't be measured in stock prices or square footage. They revered her, and the knowledge of their unwavering loyalty was the armor she wore beneath her designer gown. Richard finally broke away from his circle and made his way toward her. "Catherine, darling," he said, his voice smooth but his eyes distant. He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt cold against her skin. "You look stunning. A perfect hostess, as always." "It's our night, Richard," she replied, her voice soft. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." "Of course I am. It's a celebration of our success." He scanned the room, his gaze landing on a potential investor, his mind already moving on to the next deal, the next conquest. He saw the party not as a celebration of their union, but as a networking opportunity, a testament to his achievements. "Our success," he had said, but the emphasis was clearly on his own. The orchestra began to play a soft waltz. "Shall we dance?" Catherine asked, a hopeful tremor in her voice. Perhaps on the dance floor, in the pretense of an embrace, she could feel a flicker of the man she had married. Richard's eyes darted away. "In a moment, darling. I just need to have a quick word with Mr. Harrington about the new waterfront development." He gave her hand a dismissive pat and was gone, swallowed once more by the crowd that worshipped his success. Catherine was left standing alone, the smile frozen on her face, a statue of elegance in the center of a party that was supposed to be in her honor. She watched him go, and the unease within her crystallized into a cold, hard certainty. Something was wrong, not just the slow, creeping decay of their marriage, but something immediate, something dangerous. The air in the opulent ballroom suddenly felt thin, charged with an unseen electricity. A storm was coming, and she was standing at its epicenter, utterly and completely alone. Or so she thought. From across the room, 3 pairs of eyes watched their father dismiss their mother, and the temperature around them seemed to drop by several degrees. The Davenport boys missed nothing, and their loyalty was absolute. The party was in full swing, a symphony of clinking glasses, polite laughter, and the gentle swell of the string quartet. Richard was on the dais, microphone in hand, delivering a speech that was more about his company's third-quarter earnings than a decade of marriage. Catherine stood beside him, a portrait of wifely devotion, her applause as perfectly timed as everyone else's. She was playing her part, the role she had been assigned for years. "And so I want to thank the one person who has been there since the beginning," Richard said, his voice resonating through the ballroom. "My beautiful wife, Catherine." He turned and offered her a brilliant public smile. It was a performance, and for a fleeting second, the sheer audacity of it stole her breath. He raised his glass. "To Catherine, to 10 years." The room echoed with the toast. "To Catherine." As she brought her own glass to her lips, a commotion stirred at the grand entrance. The heavy oak doors swung open, not with the quiet deference of a hotel staffer, but with a sharp, demanding thud that cut through the celebratory murmur. A woman stood silhouetted against the light of the hallway. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, and poured into a crimson dress that was both outrageously expensive and defiantly inappropriate for the occasion. It clung to her like a second skin, accentuating a slight but unmistakable swell in her abdomen. Her platinum blonde hair was styled with salon precision, and her face, a canvas of sharp angles and fuller lips, was set in a mask of smug determination. This was Tiffany Vance. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Catherine felt a cold dread seep into her bones. She had seen this woman before, in fleeting glimpses. A passenger in Richard's car, a face in a crowd at a restaurant where Richard was supposed to be in a meeting. Her mind had dismissed these sightings as coincidence, a refusal to acknowledge the unthinkable. Now the unthinkable was striding into her life, her heels clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. Richard's face went pale, a flicker of panic in his eyes before it was replaced by a furious scowl. "Security," he hissed under his breath to a nearby aide. But Tiffany was too fast, moving with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood. She walked directly toward the dais, the crowd parting before her as if by an invisible force. Her eyes, a cold, calculating blue, were locked on Catherine. Richard, darling. Tiffany's voice was syrupy sweet, yet carried a venomous undertone that silenced the room. Aren't you going to introduce me? After all, I'm a very important part of your life now. Richard stepped in front of Catherine, his body language a mixture of protection and entrapment. Tiffany, this is not the time or the place. Get out. Tiffany let out a theatrical laugh. Oh, I think it's the perfect time. Your 10-year anniversary. A decade of… What? This sham? She gestured around the opulent room. This museum you live in with this… relic? Her gaze fell on Catherine with undisguised contempt. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye in the room was on her, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and schadenfreude. She could feel the stares like physical blows. Across the room, she saw her sons. Alexander's face was impassive, but a muscle feathered in his jaw. Benjamin's charming smile had vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. Samuel had straightened to his full, imposing height, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I think your wife deserves to know the truth, Richard, Tiffany continued, her voice rising. Don't you? She deserves to know that your late-night meetings and business trips weren't just about closing deals. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on her stomach, a gesture of pure, malicious triumph. We're having a baby, Richard, a son, a real heir to the Davenport name. The collective gasp from the guests was a physical force. The air crackled with the scandal. Catherine felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. A baby. The words echoed in the cavernous silence of her mind. He was starting a new family, while theirs quietly rotted from the inside out. Richard looked utterly trapped, his bravado crumbling. Tiffany, that's enough. Enough? I'm just getting started. Tiffany's face twisted into a snarl. She turned her full attention to Catherine, who stood frozen, a statue of public humiliation. You must have known. You must have felt him pulling away. But you just sat in your mansion, counting your jewels, too comfortable and too weak to do anything about it. You've been a placeholder for years. Catherine found her voice, though it was a mere whisper, fragile and cracked. Please leave. It was the wrong thing to say. The plea for dignity was perceived as weakness. Tiffany saw her opening for the final, devastating blow. Leave, she sneered, stepping right up to the dais until she was inches from Catherine's face. I'm not the one who will be leaving. I'm the future. You, she spat, are the past. And then, in a movement so swift and shocking, it seemed to happen in slow motion, Tiffany drew back her hand. The sound of her palm connecting with Catherine's cheek was a sickening crack, a gunshot in the silent cathedral of the ballroom. Catherine stumbled back, a sharp, stinging pain erupting on her skin. But it was nothing compared to the agony that ripped through her heart. It wasn't just a slap, it was a branding. It was a public execution of her dignity, her marriage, her entire life. The world tilted on its axis, the faces of the guests blurring into a grotesque tapestry of shock and horror. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Richard stood there, impotent, his mouth agape. He did nothing. He said nothing. He didn't defend her. He didn't move toward her. In his moment of choice, his inaction was the deepest betrayal of all. But the silence was broken by a low, guttural sound from the crowd. It wasn't a guest. It was Samuel. He started moving, a controlled avalanche of muscle and rage. Benjamin was right behind him, his face a mask of chilling composure. But it was Alexander who moved first. He didn't rush. He simply stepped forward, his presence so commanding that it stopped his younger brothers in their tracks. He reached the dais in 3 long strides, his eyes never leaving Tiffany, who now looked, for the first time, a little afraid. He ignored her completely. He walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture, went directly to his mother, and gently took her arm. He didn't look at her face, saving her the shame of meeting his gaze. He simply shielded her with his body, turning her away from the gawking crowd. Ben, Alexander's voice was low, dangerously calm. Get her coat. Sam, clear a path. His brothers moved with practiced, terrifying efficiency. Ben retrieved Catherine's wrap while Sam walked toward the exit, his sheer presence causing people to scramble out of his way. Richard finally snapped out of his stupor. Alex, wait. Alexander turned his head slowly, and the look he gave his father was utterly devoid of warmth, of recognition, of anything but ice-cold contempt. "Don't," he said, the single word carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Don't you ever speak to me or to her again." He guided Catherine away from the dais, a silent, protective phalanx formed by his brothers. As they walked through the stunned crowd, a single tear finally escaped Catherine's eye, tracing a path through the red, angry mark on her cheek. The party was over. Her marriage was over. Her life as she knew it was a pile of rubble. But as she felt the steady, powerful grip of her sons around her, a tiny, flickering ember of something new began to glow in the ashes. The promise of retribution. The Davenport boys were taking their mother home, and they were going to war. The penthouse apartment was less a home and more a fortress in the sky. It was Alexander's private residence, a minimalist masterpiece of glass, steel, and slate that occupied the entire top floor of a skyscraper he owned in downtown Manhattan. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, a glittering, indifferent witness to the drama unfolding within. There was no warmth here, no personal trinkets or family photos. It was a space designed for strategy and control, which made it the perfect location for a war council. Catherine sat on a sleek, gray leather sofa, a cashmere blanket draped over her shoulders by Benjamin. The stinging on her cheek had subsided to a dull ache, but the red mark remained, a visible symbol of her humiliation. She hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the hotel. She just stared out at the city, her mind a maelstrom of shock, grief, and a burgeoning, unfamiliar anger. Her sons gave her space. They moved around the vast living area with a quiet, synchronized purpose. Samuel stood by the window, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the streets below as if tracking an enemy. Benjamin was on his phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur as he spoke to his chief of staff. Alexander poured 3 glasses of single malt scotch, placing one on the table beside Catherine, untouched. Finally, Benjamin ended his call and turned to his brothers. "The media is already circling. Someone from the party leaked a cell phone video. It's blurry, but it shows everything. The slap is unmistakable. It'll be the lead story on every gossip site by morning." "Good," Alexander said, his voice flat. He took a sip of his scotch. "Let them report it. Let them build the narrative of the wronged wife and the monstrous husband. It will serve our purposes." Samuel turned from the window. "I've already got my team pulling everything on Tiffany Vance. Financials, past addresses, associates, social media history, everything. We'll know who she's had lunch with for the past 5 years by sunrise." "And Richard?" Benjamin asked, his eyes on Alexander. "My people are already on it," Alexander replied. "We begin dismantling Davenport Industries tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp when the market opens. We'll start with a coordinated short-selling campaign through a dozen shell corporations. We'll bleed his stock value until it's in the single digits." Catherine finally stirred, her voice raspy from disuse. "Boys, please, don't do this for me. It's my mess." 3 heads snapped in her direction. It was Benjamin who knelt before her, his expression softening as he took her hand. "Mom, this is not your mess. This is a mess that was made at your expense. You are the one thing in our lives that has always been pure, always been good. We watched you sacrifice everything for him, for us. We watched you build him up from a man with nothing but ambition into a titan. And tonight, we watched him stand there and let that creature assault you. He did nothing. The era of him doing nothing is over," Samuel added, his voice a low growl. "We are going to do everything." Alexander walked over and stood behind the sofa, placing a hand on his mother's shoulder. His touch was gentle, but his words were forged in steel. "Mom, for years we have respected your desire to maintain the peace, to keep the family together. We've held our tongues as we watched him disrespect you, ignore you, and take you for granted. That ended tonight. This isn't just about revenge. This is about justice. It's about restoring the honor that he stripped from you in front of 200 people." Catherine looked at the faces of her sons, the strategist, the narrator, and the enforcer. She saw in their eyes a unified, implacable resolve that mirrored the drive she had once seen in their father. But this was different. Richard's ambition was for himself. Theirs was for her. A lifetime of suppressed anger, of quiet heartbreaks and lonely nights, began to coalesce into a single, sharp point of focus. The woman who had been slapped was a victim. The woman sitting here now, surrounded by the unwavering loyalty of her children, felt the first stirrings of a queen. "What? What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice gaining a bit of strength. Alexander gestured for his brothers to sit. The war council began in earnest. "My role is financial," Alexander explained, his voice crisp and clinical. "Richard's identity is inextricably linked to his company, his power, his social standing, his ego. It's all built on the foundation of Davenport Industries. I'm going to turn that foundation to dust. After the short selling, I'll initiate a hostile takeover bid through a third-party equity firm I control. I know his company's weaknesses because you and I were there when he built it, Mom. I know where every vulnerability is. By the end of the month, he will no longer be the CEO of his own company." Benjamin leaned forward, his eyes alight with a predatory gleam. "My domain is his reputation. Richard loves being seen as a pillar of the community, a self-made man, a philanthropist. Tiffany loves being the hot new thing on the social scene. I'm going to destroy that. My media outlets will paint the picture that Alexander wants. We'll start with the leaked video, then we'll release carefully selected stories, interviews with disgruntled former employees of Davenport Industries, an expose on the string of failed projects he covered up. We'll highlight his extravagance while his company is mysteriously failing. For Tiffany, we'll dig into her past. A woman like that doesn't just appear out of nowhere. She has a history, and I guarantee it's not pretty. By the time I'm done, every club, every restaurant, every charity board in this city will close its doors to them. They will be social pariahs." Finally, Samuel spoke, his contribution simple and terrifying. "I'll handle the details. I'll find the leverage Alex needs for his takeover, the offshore accounts, the regulatory corners he cut. I will uncover every secret Tiffany Vance has and feed them to Ben's team. And I will ensure their lives become difficult. Not illegal, but frustrating. Their credit cards may mysteriously stop working. Their dinner reservations will be canceled. The luxury car he leases will be repossessed for a clerical error. The power to their new love nest might go out intermittently. I will dismantle their life piece by piece so they can't even enjoy the money they have left. And most importantly," he looked directly at his mother, his voice softening, "I will handle your security and your divorce. The best legal team in the country is already on retainer. You will not speak to him again. We will be your voice." Catherine listened, mesmerized by their cold, calculated fury. This wasn't a plan hatched in anger. It was a corporate strategy for the complete and utter destruction of two human beings. It was ruthless, it was brutal, and it was all for her. She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She walked to the window and looked down at the city Richard believed he owned. For the first time in a decade, she didn't feel like the wife of Richard Davenport. She felt like the mother of Alexander, Benjamin, and Samuel. She turned back to them, the red mark on her cheek no longer a brand of shame, but a battle scar. "He will want to negotiate," she said, her voice clear and strong. "He will offer money. He will threaten." "Let him," Alexander said. "He'll be negotiating with us, not you." "There is one thing I want," Catherine stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "When it's over, when they have nothing left, I want to be the one they have to face. I want to see them beg." Her three sons looked at each other, a grim, unified understanding passing between them. "Your wish," Samuel said, his voice a solemn vow, "is our command." The council was over. The battle lines were drawn, and in a silent fortress high above the New York skyline, the complete annihilation of Richard Davenport and Tiffany Vance had officially begun. The opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange on Monday morning sounded like a starting pistol for a race Richard Davenport didn't know he was in. He arrived at the headquarters of Davenport Industries in his chauffeured Bentley, feeling agitated but confident. The events of the anniversary party were a public relations nightmare, a messy personal complication, but he viewed it as manageable. He would issue a statement, make a generous donation to a women's shelter to show contrition and weather the storm. His company, his true legacy, was an unassailable fortress. He had built it with his own hands. It was strong, stable, and respected. At 9:31 a.m., the first tremor hit. A block of 500,000 shares of Davenport Industries stock was sold, causing a minor dip. His chief financial officer, a nervous man named George, noted it as an anomaly. At 9:45 a.m., another block, this time 1 million shares, was dumped onto the market through a different broker, then another, and another. It was a coordinated cascading sell-off, executed through a dozen different, untraceable shell corporations registered in places like the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein. The market smelled blood. The stock ticker for DVNPRT, once a symbol of steady growth, turned a sickening, bright red. By 10:30 a.m., the stock had plunged by 12%. Richard was in his glass-walled office on the 50th floor, bellowing into the phone at his brokers, demanding to know who was selling. The answer was always the same. They didn't know. The sellers were ghosts, phantoms in the global financial system. This was Alexander's opening salvo. From his own silent minimalist office at Aura, he watched the market data stream across a wall of monitors. He wasn't just selling, he was short-selling. He was betting against his own father, borrowing shares and selling them with the promise of buying them back later at a lower price. He was profiting from the destruction he was causing, a move of such cold, predatory capitalism that it was almost poetic. At 11:12 a.m., the second wave of the attack began. A pincer movement coordinated with Benjamin. An exclusive story broke on Apex Media News, the flagship channel of Benjamin's empire. The headline was stark: Davenport Industries under investigation for structural flaws in City Tower project. The report was meticulously researched, citing anonymous sources from within the city's building department, sources Samuel's team had cultivated, and featuring technical analysis from an independent engineering firm that Alexander had on retainer. It detailed how Davenport Industries had allegedly used substandard steel to cut costs on a recently completed skyscraper, posing a potential public safety risk. The story was dynamite. It wasn't a personal scandal, it was a direct assault on the core of Richard's business and reputation. Davenport Industries didn't just build buildings. It built safe, iconic structures. The accusation, whether immediately provable or not, was enough to cause panic. Institutional investors, pension funds, and mutual funds who valued stability began to dump their stock to mitigate risk. The stock price went into a freefall. Richard watched the Apex News report from his office television, his face turning ashen. "It's a lie," he roared, hurling a crystal paperweight against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. "It's slander! Get our legal team on the phone now! I'll sue Benjamin into oblivion!" But he couldn't. Benjamin had covered his tracks perfectly. The sources were anonymous, the allegations framed as part of an ongoing investigation, and every claim was buffered by legal weasel words like allegedly and reportedly. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, legally airtight. By noon, the stock was down 35%. Billions in market capitalization had evaporated in less than 3 hours. George, the CFO, burst into Richard's office, his face slick with sweat. "Richard, we're getting margin calls. Our creditors are getting spooked by the stock collapse. They're demanding more collateral for our loans." Richard's empire was built on leverage, on borrowed money. The value of his company was the collateral for those massive loans. As the value plummeted, the banks that had once courted him were now turning on him, demanding their pound of flesh. The attack wasn't just external. At 1 p.m., a company-wide email went out from the personal account of Marcus Thorne, Davenport's lead structural engineer, and a man who had been with him for 20 years. The email announced his immediate resignation and his acceptance of a new, senior position at a rival firm. A rival firm that, unbeknownst to Richard, was secretly owned by Alexander. Within the hour, 3 more key executives, the head of acquisitions, the chief operations officer, and the lead counsel, tendered their resignations. Alexander had spent the weekend poaching his father's most vital talent, offering them compensation packages and creative freedom that Richard could no longer match. He wasn't just sinking the ship, he was stealing the lifeboats and the navigators. The news of the executive exodus hit the financial wires at 2:30 p.m. The stock plunged again. By the time the closing bell rang at 4 p.m., the stock of Davenport Industries, which had opened that morning at a healthy $82 per share, was trading at a catastrophic $19. The company had lost nearly 75% of its value in a single day. Richard Davenport was no longer a billionaire. He sat alone in his vast office as the sun set, the sky turning the color of a fresh bruise. The shattered glass of the paperweight glittered on the carpet. His phone rang incessantly. His board members, his investors, his bankers, all demanding answers he didn't have. He stared at the stock ticker, at the brutal, bloody red number that represented the ruin of his life's work. He couldn't understand the speed, the precision, the sheer overwhelming force of the attack. It was too coordinated, too knowledgeable. It was as if the attacker knew every one of his weaknesses, every secret vulnerability in his financial armor. Then a sudden, chilling realization crept into his mind. The short-selling surgical precision, the media attack from Benjamin's company, the poached executives, it couldn't be a coincidence. He picked up his phone and dialed Alexander's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried Benjamin. Voicemail. He tried Samuel. Voicemail. His own son's. The thought was so monstrous, so unnatural, that he initially dismissed it. But the more he considered it, the more the horrifying pieces fit together. This wasn't a corporate raid. This was patricide, executed on the floor of the stock exchange. He slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, terrifying dread. He had always seen his sons as extensions of his own legacy, products of his success. He had never truly seen them, their brilliance, their loyalty to their mother, their capacity for ruthlessness, a trait they had inherited directly from him. He had built an empire of concrete and steel, and he had believed it was invincible. But he had forgotten that the strongest bonds and the most dangerous weapons are not forged in a furnace, but in the human heart. And he had shattered the one heart that had ever truly been his foundation. Now the digital guillotine had fallen, severing him from his fortune, and this was only the beginning. While Alexander was gutting Richard's company, Benjamin was preparing his own battlefield, the court of public opinion. His approach was not a blitzkrieg, but a slow, suffocating poison. He understood that scandal was a commodity, and he intended to make Richard and Tiffany the most toxic assets in New York City. The campaign began subtly. On Tuesday morning, the blurry cell phone video of the slap was leaked to a popular, voracious gossip blog. Benjamin's team made sure the blog's owner received an anonymous tip, along with a high-resolution photo of Catherine from the event, looking regal and composed, juxtaposed with a candid shot of Tiffany, her face contorted in an ugly sneer. The narrative was set without a single word from Apex Media. A graceful, dignified wife assaulted by a vulgar homewrecker. The story went viral. Justice for Catherine began trending on social media. That was the appetizer. The main course was served on Wednesday evening during Apex Media's primetime investigative news program, The Insider. The host, a sharp, respected journalist named Mark O'Connell, opened the show with a somber expression. "Tonight we have a story that touches on the dark side of wealth and power in our city," he began. "It's the story of Richard Davenport, a man many see as a titan of industry. But there's another side to his story, a side told by the people he left in his wake." The segment was a brutal, systematic takedown. It featured an interview with a tearful, elderly couple from Queens, whose family-owned hardware store had been forced out of business by one of Davenport's aggressive development projects, for which they were paid a fraction of its worth. It showed documents, procured by Samuel's investigators, detailing 3 separate safety violations on Davenport construction sites that had been settled quietly out of court. They even interviewed a former executive assistant who spoke, under the condition of anonymity with her voice and face obscured, about Richard's explosive temper and the culture of fear within the company. Nothing in the report was a lie. Benjamin was simply collecting all the ugly truths Richard had successfully buried over the years and holding them up to the light. The story wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about a predatory businessman, a bully who crushed the little guy on his way to the top. The affair was no longer just a personal failing, it was a symptom of his rotten character. The next day, Benjamin's focus shifted to Tiffany. His team had been busy, and the file Samuel had provided on her was a goldmine. Tiffany Vance had presented herself as a mysterious ingenue, a former art gallery curator with a vague European education. The reality was far grittier. Apex's online division published a long-form exposé titled The Calculated Climb of Tiffany Vance. It traced her real history back to a trailer park in rural Florida. Her name wasn't Tiffany Vance, it was Cindy Potts. It detailed a history of dating wealthy older men, a string of broken engagements, and accusations of credit card fraud from a former benefactor in Miami that were settled out of court. They had photos of her from her former life, a stark contrast to the polished socialite she pretended to be. The article painted a clear picture of a conniving, relentless gold digger. To add a final, devastating touch, it included a quote from her estranged, weary-sounding mother. Cindy was always ambitious. She never cared who she had to step on to get what she wanted. The social impact was immediate and catastrophic. Richard, already reeling from his financial ruin, found himself socially exiled. The chairman of the museum board he'd sat on for 15 years called to politely request his resignation. His membership at the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club was suspended, citing a morals clause in their bylaws. A charity gala he was supposed to co-chair sent a terse email informing him that his presence was no longer required. When he tried to book a table at Le Cirque, his favorite restaurant, he was told they were fully booked for the foreseeable future. For Tiffany, the fallout was even more brutal. She had been on the verge of infiltrating the elite social circles she so desperately craved. Now she was a pariah. A boutique store on Madison Avenue lost the dress she had on hold. The socialites who had once air-kissed her cheek now looked right through her. She was publicly disinvited from an upcoming Fashion Week event via a scathing social media post from the designer. She was no longer the seductive future Mrs. Davenport. She was Cindy Potts from a Florida trailer park, a public joke, a cautionary tale whispered over champagne flutes. The psychological pressure was immense. They were trapped in Richard's penthouse, a gilded cage where every incoming call brought fresh humiliation. The city they had sought to conquer had turned on them completely. Richard's anger gave way to a desperate, paranoid fear. Tiffany's smug confidence curdled into shrill, tearful accusations. "You have to fix this, Richard," she shrieked, throwing a copy of a tabloid at him. The front page featured an unflattering picture of her next to the headline, "Tramp in the Tower." "How?" he yelled back, his voice hoarse with stress. "My company is in ruins. My name is Mud. This is a coordinated attack. It's my sons." "Then call them. Beg them. Do something." Tiffany sobbed, her carefully constructed facade crumbling to reveal the terrified, grasping woman beneath. "They're ruining my life." "Your life?" Richard laughed, a bitter broken sound. "You ruined my life the second you walked into that party. You and your greed." The dream they had shared, a future of power, wealth, and social prestige, had become a nightmare. Benjamin had not laid a single hand on them, yet he had locked them in a prison of their own making. He had turned public opinion into their warden, and shame into their bars. They could have all the money left in their bank accounts, but they couldn't buy back their names. And as they tore each other apart in their luxurious prison, Benjamin sat in his office, reading the analytics on his media campaign's reach and engagement, a cold, satisfied smile on his face. The second phase of the war was a resounding success. With Richard's fortune decimated and his reputation in tatters, the third and final phase of the assault began. This was Samuel's domain. Where Alexander's attack was financial and Benjamin's was social, Samuel's was personal, logistical, and relentlessly invasive. His objective was to dismantle the very mechanics of their daily lives, to turn their world into a landscape of friction and frustration, ensuring they had no peace, no comfort, and no escape. The campaign started with small, unnerving inconveniences. The high-speed internet in Richard's penthouse began to fail intermittently. The premium cable subscription was mysteriously downgraded to basic. The smart home system, which controlled the lights and temperature, would malfunction at odd hours, plunging them into darkness or blasting Arctic air in the middle of the night. These were minor annoyances, the kind of things that could be dismissed as technical glitches, but their frequency was maddening. Next, Samuel targeted their finances on a micro level. Richard went to pay for dinner at one of the few restaurants that would still take his reservation, only to have his platinum credit card declined, then his backup card, and the one after that. A call to the credit card company's fraud department led him through an endless maze of automated menus before a representative informed him his accounts were frozen due to suspicious activity. The activity, of course, had been manufactured by Samuel's cyber warfare division. Tiffany's turn came when she tried to go shopping. Her cards were also declined. When she went to an ATM, she found her daily withdrawal limit had been reduced to a paltry $100. The thousands she had siphoned from Richard were trapped in an account she suddenly couldn't access. The lease on Richard's Bentley was up for renewal. The leasing company, which had been hounding him to upgrade for years, now suddenly informed him that due to his changed financial circumstances, they would not be renewing the contract. The car was repossessed from the building's garage in the middle of the night. They were left with Tiffany's sports car, a garish pink convertible that now felt more like a clown car than a status symbol. But Samuel's masterstroke was yet to come. His deep dive investigation into Tiffany had yielded more than just her embarrassing backstory. It had uncovered a secret she had guarded jealously, a piece of leverage she believed was her ultimate trump card. Samuel's team, using a combination of surveillance and well-placed informants, had discovered that Tiffany was still in contact with a former lover, a struggling personal trainer named Drake. Their communications were discreet, but Samuel's people were better. They had obtained security footage from a clinic, followed by a wire transfer record. The evidence was irrefutable. Drake was the father of her unborn child. The revelation changed the entire dynamic. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about a meticulously planned fraud. Tiffany hadn't just seduced Richard, she had targeted him, intending to trap him with a child that wasn't his, securing her claim to the Davenport fortune forever. Alexander and Benjamin received the file from Samuel in a secured email. The information was explosive, the final nail in Tiffany's coffin. But they decided not to leak it to the press. This particular truth was not for public consumption. It was a private weapon, to be deployed at the moment of maximum psychological impact. The pressure on Richard and Tiffany was now unbearable. Their world had shrunk to the confines of the penthouse, and even that was no longer a sanctuary. Richard was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, spending his days on the phone with lawyers, trying to fight off the hostile takeover bid Alexander had officially launched. He was losing. His remaining board members, seeing the writing on the wall, were abandoning him, eager to make a deal with the new power. Tiffany, stripped of her social ambitions and financial access, was becoming unhinged. The pregnancy, once her greatest weapon, was now a ticking clock. The tension in the apartment was thick and suffocating, punctuated by bitter arguments and long, hostile silences. One rainy afternoon, the dam finally broke. Richard was staring at a letter from his lawyers, outlining the grim terms of the impending takeover, when Tiffany stormed into the room, waving a stack of bills. "The utilities are being shut off, Richard. The electricity, the water. They say we haven't paid. The accounts are frozen, I told you," he snapped, not looking up. "Then unfreeze them. You're Richard Davenport, for God's sake. Do something," she shrieked. "I'm not that man anymore. Don't you get it?" he roared, rising from his chair. "That man is gone. He was destroyed thanks to you." "To me?" She laughed, a hysterical, sharp sound. "You were an easy mark, Richard. Old, arrogant, and desperate to feel young again. You wanted to believe a girl like me could love a man like you. It was the easiest con I ever pulled." The confession, born of rage and frustration, hung in the air between them. In that moment, Richard saw her clearly for the first time, not as a symbol of his virility and power, but as a parasite. And it was then that Samuel chose to make his move. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb outside their building. A man in a sharp suit, one of Samuel's top operatives, got out and entered the building. A few minutes later, the private elevator to the penthouse chimed. Richard opened the door to find the impassive-looking man holding a simple manila envelope. "Mr. Davenport," the man said, his voice neutral, "this is for you, a message from your sons. They said you should review it with Miss Vance. They will expect your call." The man handed him the envelope and left without another word. With trembling hands, Richard closed the door. Tiffany watched him, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What is it?" He opened the envelope and pulled out the contents. There were two items inside. The first was a copy of a paternity test report with the names Richard Davenport and Baby Vance Potts listed. The result was stark. Probability of paternity, 0%. The second was a high-definition surveillance photograph. It showed Tiffany and a handsome, muscular man, Drake, in a passionate kiss, taken just 2 weeks prior. Richard stared at the documents, his face a mask of disbelief, then slowly contorting into a visage of pure, murderous rage. He looked up from the papers, his eyes locking onto Tiffany. The last vestiges of their toxic alliance dissolved into pure, unadulterated hatred. The walls had not just closed in, they had collapsed, burying them both in the rubble. This was the checkmate Samuel had engineered. Their partnership was obliterated, leaving them isolated, broken, and ready for the final reckoning. The meeting was set in a sterile law office conference room, a neutral space designed for endings. Catherine arrived first, flanked by her 3 sons. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, her posture erect, her expression serene. She was not here for a fight. She was here to accept a surrender. Alexander, Benjamin, and Samuel stood behind her chair, a silent, formidable wall of power, their presence a suffocating weight in the room. Richard and Tiffany were escorted in minutes later, a pathetic sight. Richard's expensive suit hung on his depleted frame, his arrogance replaced by a hollow, defeated look. Tiffany was pale and drawn, clutching a handbag like a shield. They sat opposite Catherine, a chasm of polished mahogany between them. "Catherine," Richard began, his voice cracking, "this has gone too far. Your sons, they've destroyed everything." Catherine looked at him, her gaze calm and detached. "You destroyed everything, Richard. A long time ago. My sons merely collected the debt." "Please," he begged, his eyes shifting to the 3 stone-faced men behind her. "I'm your father. Call it off." Alexander spoke, his voice as cold as a winter morning. "The time for arrangements is over. The hostile takeover of Davenport Industries is finalized on Friday. You will be removed. That is a non-negotiable." Tiffany, seeing her last hope evaporating, began to whine. "Catherine, please, I was wrong. I'm pregnant. Think of the child. Have mercy." Benjamin let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Mercy? As for your child," he said, his eyes glinting, "we suggest you direct any future correspondence to a Mr. Drake. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear the news." Tiffany flinched as if struck, her face turning a blotchy red. Richard slumped in his chair, the finality of it all crushing him. "What do you want?" he whispered. This was the moment Catherine had been waiting for. She leaned forward, her quiet voice carrying the authority of a judge. "You will agree to my terms in the divorce. I will not be taking half of what's left, Richard. I will be taking 90%. The Greenwich Mansion, the penthouse, the art, the assets. You will be left with an annuity sufficient for a comfortable life, nothing more." She then turned her gaze to Tiffany. "You will get nothing. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear from our lives. If you violate it, we will release every sordid detail of your fraudulent scheme to the public and press criminal charges." 90%? Richard choked out. "That's theft." "No, Richard," Catherine replied, her voice unwavering. "It's back pay. For my years as your partner and the mother of your children, it's compensation for a decade of neglect and public humiliation. It's the price of my dignity, and I've decided it's very expensive." Desperation clawed at him. He looked from Catherine's resolute face to the implacable wall of his sons. There was no negotiation. "I need to hear you say it, Richard," Catherine insisted. "Both of you. I want you to ask me for this. Ask me for the mercy of letting you walk away with anything at all." His head bowed. "Please, Catherine," he mumbled. "Please have mercy." Through her tears, Tiffany choked out the same words. Please, mercy. Catherine gave a slight nod to Alexander, who pushed a set of documents across the table. Sign, he commanded. With trembling hands, they signed away their lives. When it was done, Catherine stood up. She did not look at them again. She turned and walked toward the door, her sons falling into formation around her, leaving her past to crumble in the silent, sterile room. And so, the empire built on betrayal fell. Not with a bang, but with the stroke of a pen in a sterile conference room. Catherine Davenport walked out into the sunlight, not as a scorned wife, but as the matriarch of a family bound by unbreakable loyalty. With her sons by her side, she went on to establish the Davenport Foundation, a powerful charity dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after betrayal, turning her pain into a beacon of hope for thousands. Richard and Tiffany vanished into obscurity, a footnote in a story of hubris and consequence. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that the deepest betrayals often forge the strongest alliances, and that hell hath no fury like a mother protected by her sons. If this story of ultimate revenge resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story of justice, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of drama and retribution. What did you think of the sons' revenge? Was it too much, or was it exactly what they deserved? Let us know in the comments below.